hormones. And so I tried so long to format this better, by the way, until I finally just titled it was poorly formatted. But there's a million different names for sugar, which is not just because people are like, I want to express my creativity, and it's to hide these things, because the idea that no one thinks like sugar is probably really good for me, and so sugar may not be really good for me, but I bet agave nectar is, because agave sounds exotic. Florida crystals is my favorite, which I don't know if that one's on the list or not. I think it is. Yeah. So we got our own sugar name, and so there's all these different names of sugar, and it's to hide this stuff. Now the reason that sugar is so particularly insidious is because glucose, every single cell in your body can use it, and every cell in your body wants to use it, and every cell has insulin receptors to use glucose. Fructose, which is half of sugar, because sugar is sucrose, which is a fructose and a glucose together. Fructose, there's only one part of your body that can use fructose, and that's your liver. It's the only thing that can process it. Everything else, your muscles cannot use fructose. It has to go to your liver. It can eventually make it to your muscles once your liver turns it into glycogen, and then it goes to glucose, and then it goes to your muscles. But it's pointless to have fructose unless you're in like dramatically depleted all of your sugar, and so the original Gatorade that helped people perform well, it had glucose, and then but it tasted. This is just based off what I've read about it. It tasted not good. No one would be like, I could go for some Gatorade, because it just tasted like you were drinking a recovery something. And then it got bought out, I think, is it Pepsi or Coke owns them, one or the other. And so they made it taste really, really good. And now it's got high fructose corn syrup and sugar. And so it's not nearly as useful as it was, because you're not getting this immediate glucose. Half of it is fructose. By the way, the whole high fructose corn syrup versus cane sugar or pure sugar, your body treats it basically the same, whether the ratio is 55% glucose or 50-50. There's not really a big difference. Maybe taste-wise, people might prefer one over the other, but metabolically, it's going to do the same thing either way. And so what happens is we've got all this sugar around constantly, and so your body, where insulin would have to surge, and then you'd store up all that stuff because it's 50,000 years ago, and you found some gross potatoes, but you're going to eat them because you're hungry. It would surge, and then it would come back down, and then you had low insulin for a long time, and then it would surge. Well, now it's like you have a Pop-Tart, and it surges, and then your blood sugar plummets because your insulin went really, really high, so your blood sugar comes down, and now it's 10 o'clock, and it's Rachel's birthday, and there's donuts in the break room, and you're starving, so you're going to have more, and then your insulin surges, and then your blood sugar, and it's lunch, and then gross. And so it's this constant supply, and so your body builds resistance to insulin because insulin's always around, which was not the state that it was in before. Yes?
What about the monk fruit sugar or the alcohol sugar?
Yes, great question. They don't matter, and so it used to, there's different. There are some really what's the word I'm looking for? Particular advocates of fasting and the ketogenic diet, where they'll talk about artificial sweeteners raising your insulin levels, and so it matters. The most impressive one, you can find one study that says that sucralose in particular, which I think is Splenda, that it will increase your insulin levels by 20% from baseline, which is nothing compared to sugar still, but still enough. But for the most part, studies will show that sugar alcohols and monk fruit and stevia, the ones that aren't necessarily sugar alcohols but have the same sweetness. What's interesting about those is that they are like monk fruit. It's I can't remember the exact number, but it's like 4,000 times sweeter than sugar. So technically, like gram for gram, it would have calories in it, but with the amount of sweetness that you get out of it, you need like 1,000th as much. So like your monk fruit is contributing like 0.01 calories to your food. So it's the same as being calorie free. And so most people on both sides of the aisle on this, on Team Hormone and Team Calorie, talk about artificial sweeteners as not mattering, and even people that don't trust them, which is an increase. It's getting more and more a minority. It's going in that direction rather than the other way. Still, everyone agrees that it's a million times better than having sugar. Allulose is one that's particularly interesting because it looks so chemically similar to fructose, but it's a different chemical makeup, and so it tastes really, really similar to sugar. It's slightly less sweet, but it tastes really similar. But there have been studies on that show that it actually, when added to food, will decrease the postprandial glucose spike. And so it actually is, in some studies, been helpful in that direction, allulose in particular. So that one's a fun one. This is the dietary guidelines and how it happens. So the second thing that causes insulin resistance, we're going to skip past this because it's way too detailed, but in nature, it is really, really hard to find an instance where sugar and fat are in the same thing. Like if you find an animal and eat it, it'll have fat and protein, but there's not any sugar there. If you find a fruit and you eat it, it'll have carbohydrates there, maybe a little bit of protein, but there's not going to be any fat there. You can find places where it's like there's a little bit of carbohydrate, maybe like with avocado and a fat, but like it's really, really hard to find nothing even remotely close to a donut, which is like fat and sugar, and it's part of why it's so good because your body is built to recognize like this is the most pure energy I can possibly have, and every survival mechanism it's hyper palatable. It's firing off every bit of dopamine you've got because it is such a high reward. Because if you were to find that in 50,000 BC, you are the king of the world because you have found a lot of energy that tastes really, really good. But what happens is. Someday I'll give a boring talk to just my dad about this diacylglycerol. But triglycerides, our mitochondria get less effective, and we get more and more insulin resistant. See, aren't you glad I'm not going over that? So here's the effects of this insulin resistance. We have increased fat stores. It decreases our fat burning. It increases our hunger. It decreases our energy. All of this stuff is why eat less, move more. Great advice. Very, very hard to do. So metabolic flexibility is the thing that makes the difference here. And metabolic flexibility is what's missing for most of us, really. And it is the ability to burn your own body fat when there isn't sugar around. So if you have somebody who's metabolically flexible, if they eat breakfast or if they skip breakfast, they're pretty okay. Like they're not really, really hungry. And when it gets to lunch, like they're like, yep, I can eat now. But it's not, there's never that hangry, like, oh, I'm going to kill everyone, because you don't hit that extreme low blood sugar because your body has the ability to access your fat, burn it as you need to. It's part of why fasting became so popular, because it's pretty brutal to start fasting, like because you're starting from a point of metabolic inflexibility, so you do want to kill everybody, but then your body has to learn what to do, and so you start burning your own fat stores. And so once somebody's been fasting for a while, that same person that's going to murder someone after 4 hours of not eating, they truly can go like 48 hours they don't eat, and they're pretty okay. Like it's not because they've increased their metabolic flexibility, the ability to burn their fat stores when sugar isn't around. And so it's rare because of those two things. And by the way, the poor mitochondrial function, it's part of why, here's a mitochondria. It's part of why exercise, I was saying, it's a 90-10 thing, 90% what you eat and all that. But part of why exercise is so incredibly helpful is because it is a way, maybe the only way, probably, it is a way to take sugar out of your blood and put it into what is by far the biggest bank for storing sugar, which is your muscles. Skips insulin altogether. It requires zero insulin to get sugar into your muscles when you're exercising. And so that whole idea of like walking for 10 minutes after you eat, that is legit, like because you are taking the calories that you just consumed, the sugar, the carbohydrate, and you are putting it into muscles like physically that's what's happening, and it doesn't require the same insulin spikes to do that stuff. And so you can increase your insulin sensitivity. So far more than the calories that you're burning with the exercise, the sensitivity to insulin that you are increasing with your exercise, so that you need less insulin to accomplish the same amount of work. That is why exercise is so helpful. It's one of many reasons, but it's one of the big ones. Because as you gain muscle, beyond just the fact that it's really metabolically active and burns more calories just because you're carrying that muscle, you are gaining more bank to carry sugar out of your bloodstream and put it into your muscles, and that's what exercise is doing for you. That's why increased, mitochondrial function is so helpful. And so high intensity interval training is great for this, but also just low to moderate intensity, steady state cardio, like nothing really matches it for getting your mitochondria to just burn and oxidize fats and being able to use energy really efficiently. So that's part of why that stuff matters.
So creating muscle creates more mitochondria.
Yes. Mm-hmm. And
So when you take a walk, do you take it before or after you eat?
after.
After you eat.
Yep. And doing it before is fine too, because you're burning up some of the glycogen. One of the interesting things about glycogen is your body, your muscles don't have the ability to export glycogen in the form of glucose to anywhere else. Like wherever that glycogen is formed, it's going to be used there, and that's it. Which is part of why whole body stuff really does matter, because the glycogen that's stored in your quads is going to be used as energy in your quads, but it's not going to be used as energy in your brain or in your bicep. And so it's part of why doing the whole body exercise matters so much. Part of why walking is so effective is because by far the most muscle mass, except for me, by far the most muscle mass that you've got is your butt and quads and thighs, and like your leg muscles are so much of your muscle mass that you've got. It's a huge area for storage, so that you can both burn off glycogen that's in there and also replace it with sugar that you're eating, rather than your body can also turn sugar into fat, and that's what it will do with extra once your glycogen stores are all full. So keeping your glycogen stores decreased so that you can put sugar into there rather than putting sugar into your fat cells in the form of fat is a very useful thing to know. And that's part of, so how do we fix this thing? How many minutes am I at now? Okay, good. Yeah, so okay. 10 minutes left for anything practical. Perfect. How do we fix this? This is the main point. We want to eat less. Yep. But we want to eat less by wanting to eat less, like not feeling. No one can walk around hungry all the time. You'll become an extremely unpleasant person. And even if you succeed in it, what will happen is you just keep chasing this thing where your body's trying to get back to some set point. The system is still hijacked. And so eating less because you want to eat less is really the only way to really do it, like because you're eating the amount that your body needs, and you're not just working off of a hijacked system that's saying we need calories. It's only been 3 hours since we had the Pop-Tart. We've got to get more food in, or because you can't think. That's not in your head, like you really can't. So eating less because you want to eat less, and then also moving more because you want to move more. One of the things that happens with insulin resistance, or having these glucose levels that are wild swings everywhere, is your body is in full-on storage mode. It's trying. It's got a lot of insulin, so it's saying we've got energy. We're going to store all this stuff. It is not going to try to burn energy at the same time, and so your metabolism is a bit slower. But more importantly, the difference between the person that just is taking the stairs all the time and the person that is like, I will wait for 3 minutes until this elevator gets here because I'm not going to take the stairs. It's not really like there's some willpower in that, but most of it is one person feels like taking the stairs. Like they're like, yeah, I'll take it. Which is hard to imagine when you don't want to take the stairs, but that's because that's somebody where they have more energy. Their body is saying we've got energy, so you're increasing your non-exercise activity thermogenesis. You're wanting to move more. When you talk on the phone, you're pacing around the room rather than just sitting perfectly still. And so that's moving more because you want to move more. So to accomplish this, we have 3 levers. This is just for the nutrition thing. For exercise, Martrice will tell you what to do. But for the nutrition part of this, there's 3 levers, which I have shamelessly stolen from this brilliant guy named Peter Attia. He's so smart. He's just next level. I have a crush on Peter Attia. And so these 3 levers, he talks about these with nutrition, and the general guideline that he talks about is you want to be pulling on one of these all of the time, 2 of them most of the time, 3 of them sometimes. And so composition is the types of food that you are eating. That would be things like I'm doing only ketogenic, or I'm eating only, I don't know, fish, something, vegetarian, whatever, nutrient composition. The second one is timing, which would be things like intermittent fasting or longer fasts, what some people call time-restricted feeding, which is like I eat during this 4-hour window. And then the last one is amount, which is just the amount of calories that you have in. So that one would be something like the if it fits your macros, where it's like I can have 1,800 calories today, and that's the lever I'm pulling. Like I might eat them all throughout the day, and it might be all Snickers, but I'm restricting the amount of calories that I'm having. So those 3 levers. The reason that composition is the first one on here is because this is my opinion, but I'm right. That this one is the most important, and that's because if you start with the amount of calories, it's just saying to a poor person you're poor because you don't have enough money. If you start with the amount of calories and just say I just am eating less because I need to eat less, you're not addressing the actual problem behind it. And so the composition of what you're eating and the signals that you're giving your body really does make a difference. This is something I'm embarrassed at how long I didn't know this, because I was a doctor and I cared about it, and it still took me, it was kind of years before I really figured out. I always just had like carbohydrate restriction and ketogenic in my head as like kind of the same thing. Like it's all like an Atkins, like you're either, and it was that whole idea. I read one time on some forum, being in mild ketosis is like being a little bit pregnant. As long as you're in ketosis, then you've got enough carb restriction going on, and you either are or you aren't. And you can be deep in ketosis or mildly, and again, it's kind of true, but even that is not helpful and true. Like there's a big difference between being way deep, your body's producing tons of ketones because you've had 0 carbohydrates, or you've been fasting for 2 weeks solid, being deeply into ketosis versus being mildly in ketosis, and being not in ketosis but just restricting carbohydrates when you're having them or how much you're having them, like absolutely has an impact. It's not this all or nothing, like I'm doing no carb or I'm somebody who like absolutely I eat pasta 6 meals a day. Like there's a huge difference there. And so for the average person, just restricting carbohydrates to like 150 grams a day, which is a very general thing because it's very different depending on how much you weigh to begin with, but that general range, say 100 to 200 grams a day, like there's a huge difference between that and the standard American diet, which is just, depending on what you're eating, 400 to 600 to sometimes 800 grams of carbohydrates a day. Because your body can only store in glycogen somewhere around 500 grams of carbohydrate, 500 grams of glucose. Plus, if it's sugar that we're having, half of that stuff is fructose, which our liver is trying desperately to process, but it can't, so it's turning it into fat. And we're getting, our liver is getting fattier, and it's making us more insulin resistant. Anyway, there's the myth that you either are no carb or carb is not helpful. There is a spectrum to that, and so decreasing the amount of sugar that you're having decreases the area under the curve of how high your insulin is for how long. You want that to be as low as possible. And what that does is it decreases how hungry you are and increases the amount that your body wants to exercise, wants to move, the amount of energy that you have, which seems counterintuitive that having 150 grams of like good carbs, that is like fruit and vegetables and whole grains, which is one to be careful of, because again, there's really hard to find breads without sugar, but they exist, like there's Ezekiel bread and things like that, but and what's weird about it is as you do that, what originally tastes pretty gross, because you're like, this isn't Wonder Bread, I can't be fooled by this, Ezekiel, it starts to taste good, and it's not that you're like a Stockholm syndrome, like I guess I love this now. It's because literally you are hitting the wiring in your brain the way it was built to be used, and so that stuff actually tastes good, and it's stuff that you want rather than the crap. Not gonna lie, Reese Cups always taste good. It's hard to overpower stuff that's built in of like, hey, this is really calorie dense and delicious. It's built by scientists with beakers in a lab trying to make it hyper palatable so that everyone's addicted to it. I know it's conspiracy theory. It's true. But if you get past that and you get their wiring to be correct, then stuff that is like actually good, these carbohydrates that are able to be processed in a reasonable way, where the blood sugar is slowly rising and your insulin levels kind of keeping up with it, and it's slowly coming down. You don't hit these deep spikes of like, my insulin's through the roof, my blood sugar's through the floor, I'm going to punch this guy next to me on an elevator and take his candy bar from him. You don't ever get there because you're keeping nutrient sensors where they should be. And so that's the myth of having to go low carb, no carb. Because people do that, they get keto flu, they're miserable. I'm a big fan of ketogenic diets, by the way. It's part of what made the big difference for me. But part of what I wished I knew early on was like, you don't have to start there. Like you can get to the point where it's not even hard. You don't even go through that keto flu because you've gotten your nutrient sensors right, and you only need this many carbs, and then eventually you can get it, whittled down. You don't have to though, because especially if Martrice is making you do a bunch of muscle ups, then sometimes it's helpful to have some carbs before and helpful to have some carbs afterwards to replenish those glycogen stores that are all beat out now. But this idea of low carb, no carb, there is such a thing as like having an appropriate amount of carbs, and it's not like you have to be a little bit in ketosis or a lot, because ketosis only happens when you are profoundly carb deficient. Your body then kicks over into this special source of metabolism purely to save your brain, because you've got to save some glucose for your brain, and so your body's like, well, I guess we'll use ketones so their brain doesn't die. Protein matters. By the way, the natural sources versus processed food, that's why that's such a huge deal.